Everybody knows who Ed Gein is. Even if you've never spoken the name, you've heard the story. The Quiet Man, from Plainfield, Wisconsin. The one whose farmhouse became the wound on the map of America. It began as whispers, strange behaviour, missing people, and rumours that didn't quite make sense. And then came the truth. The truth that was too dark to comprehend and too twisted to believe. The events that unfolded in that tiny town have been told and retold until they became folklore. A ghost story in the shape of reality. But what if we've only heard half of it? Because behind the headlines, behind the photographs, there was another name. The one that the world forgot. A woman who might have played a role far greater than anyone realised. Her name was Adeline Watkins. And without her, the legend of Ed Gein might have looked very different. Plainfield was small, just a scattering of houses, a church, a store, and a graveyard. It was a place where people said good morning to strangers, but never spoke of the strange things going on. And in the stillness, Ed Gein lived alone. He helped his neighbours. He fixed the roofs, repaired broken tools. He was strange, but he was kind. And someone who kept himself to himself. He lived in the old family farmhouse, far out past the woods. The place was crumbling, even back then. Rooms sealed off, furniture draped in dust sheets, and the walls heavy in silence. And inside that silence lived another voice, his mother. Even in death, she ruled him. The sermons echoed through the rooms like a curse. To her, purity was survival, and to Ed, it became only the law. And when she died, the faith didn't die with her. It just moved inside his head. And whilst the people of Plainfield pitied him, the pity over time turned into disgrace, and distance became something colder. But there was one person who seemed to understand Ed's silence, and in stepped Adeline Watkins. They weren't close at first, just acquaintances, but she treated him differently than most, not with pity, but with curiosity. The kind of quiet respect from his gentleness, and maybe his strangeness too. Adeline wasn't like the others in Plainfield. She was educated, well-spoken, and unafraid of topics that made people shift in the seats. What began as companionship became something else. Not love, not in the ordinary sense. Something quieter, something stranger. Two broken pieces recognising the same fracture in each other. They talked for hours on the road into town. and sometimes in the farmhouse. The kind of places where no one ever listened long enough to understand. Both of them had a fascination with what others would avoid. The macabre, the grotesque, and the beauty that hides inside decay. For most people, it was a conversation to end, but for Ed and Adeline, it was the beginning. She had the photographs, those grim impossible pictures from Europe, images that no one in Plainfield could have ever found, or would even dare to keep. She would show them to him, and she'd watch in anticipation at the look on Ed's face. And he didn't flinch. He didn't breathe. Something changed behind his eyes. A spark. The embers burning slow. And those pictures stayed with him. Every face etched deeper into his thoughts. Adeline said they were proof of human cruelty, a lesson in what people could do to each other. But to Ed, it became something else entirely. A fascination, a calling, and a blueprint. But in Adeline, he found someone who didn't look away from the dark. Maybe that's what undid him. Some say she was lonely too, drawn to him, the way a fire draws its own smoke. Others whispered that she led him on, teasing the boundaries of his mind that was already cracked and fragile. She gave him a window to the unspeakable, and perhaps, without meaning to, handed him permission. Together they built something neither could name, a strange crooked kind of affection, found not through love or lust, but death itself. When Adeline left Plainfield, something in Ed began to unravel. The quiet that had once kept him together started to echo. And inside that silence, a voice began to grow louder. He stopped speaking to neighbours, he stopped visiting town, and became very withdrawn. He spent his days alone inside the farmhouse, surrounded by dust, the dead, and the memories of his mother. At night he began to visit the cemeteries. He said he wanted to feel closer to his mother. But over time them visits became something else. Between 1947 and 1952, Ed made over 40 trips to the graveyard. And he dug into freshly filled graves, taking what he wanted. And inside the farmhouse, police would later find what he made from those visits. Furniture, ornaments, and household items that were built from the dead. He called them his projects. In 1954, tavern owner Mary Hogan vanished. No trace, no suspect. 3 years later, Bernice Warden, the local hardware store owner, disappeared in the same way, and inside a shop was a receipt, and it had one man's name on it: Ed Gein. On November the 16th, 1957, deputies traced it back to Gein's farmhouse. The doors were locked, windows boarded shut, and when they forced their way inside, they walked into one of the darkest discoveries in American history. In the barn beside the house, they found Bernice Warden's body. Inside the house, the remains of Mary Hogan and the bodies of the missing women of Plainfield. and what they uncovered inside that house was almost beyond description. A place where grief, obsession and horror had all fused into one. Gein confessed quietly. He admitted to visiting the cemeteries. He admitted to making things from what he brought back, called them his projects, and that his mother would have understood. He was charged with 2 murders, declared legally insane, spending the rest of his life in state hospital. The farmhouse was burned down the following year, and nobody claimed responsibility. After the arrest, reporters searched for anyone that had knew Ed, and that's when Adeline Watkins returned. She spoke to the newspapers, claiming she'd known Ed for nearly 20 years, but he'd once asked her to marry him, and that he was kind and gentle, and also lonely. For a brief time she was everywhere, the woman who almost married a murderer. As the investigation deepened, and the photographs from inside the house were made public, the story suddenly changed. She retracted her statements, denied the proposal, and blamed the press for twisting her words. And then she disappeared. No more interviews, no trace on the public records, and her name simply slipped into the chapters of the past. Some say she left Wisconsin, others say she never did. But either way, she faded from history, just like the farmhouse itself. For a brief moment she was part of a story, a familiar face tied to one of America's darkest crimes. But once the full truth surfaced, she stepped back, and the world let her disappear. What remains is the question of influence, because before Adeline Watkins, Ed Gein was a quiet man, isolated, broken, but contained. She brought with her the photographs, the real images of death and destruction, the kind that people would never see back then. For Adeline it was grim history, but for Ed, it became obsession. And those images ignited something in his mind. They gave shape to darkness. Maybe in some small way, it gave permission to grow. It's impossible to know how much she understood, or whether she even thought about what came after, but her influence hangs over the story like smoke. Something unseen, but impossible to ignore. Adeline faded into obscurity, and Ed Gein lived out his days in confinement. But the shadow that connects them never really disappeared. Because in every story like this, there's always the questions that can't be answered. How much of what had become was born from madness? And how much of it was made from influence? If you found this story interesting, please consider subscribing to the channel. It'll help more than you think. And if you believe that Adeline Watkins played her part in shaping who Ed Gein became, or if you think he was always destined to fall that way, I'd love to hear your comments down below. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might find it interesting, someone who doesn't mind walking through the darker side of history. And don't forget that some stories end and others whisper long after they should have gone quiet.